The cabin of the morning flight buzzed with energy. Businessmen flipped through emails. Families wrestled with luggage. Children tugged at their parents' sleeves. Everything felt orderly, efficient, polished. Then, through the jet bridge, a young man appeared who seemed to rupture that polished image in an instant. Ethan Carter entered the plane with a posture that carried both weariness and quiet defiance. He was in his mid-20s, his skin pale against the dim cabin lights, his features striking but dulled by fatigue. His clothes were not pressed like the others. His shirt bore wrinkles from a night without rest, and the denim jacket over his shoulders looked as though it had traveled too many roads without care. His hair was messy, his steps slow, his eyes tired, yet those same eyes glimmered with a depth that was hard to place, as if they had seen storms no one else in that cabin could imagine. Pinned over his heart was a small rainbow badge, its colors faded but unashamed. That single detail was enough to sharpen the stares already cast his way. People whispered, some turning away, others sneering. To them, he looked like someone out of place, a misfit who had walked into the wrong part of the world. A woman seated near the window pressed a scarf over her nose, her eyes dripping with contempt. She did not speak, but her posture shouted loudly enough, "He doesn't belong here." The flight attendant caught sight of him and approached with an overly careful politeness. She asked again for his boarding pass, even though he had already shown it at the gate. Ethan handed it over without protest, his lips calm, his gaze steady. She studied the ticket, studied him, and then gave a curt nod before letting him move on. No apology, no smile. He took his seat at the window in row 17, placed his worn bag beneath the chair, and leaned his head against the cool frame of the cabin. His eyes drifted outward, to the ocean of clouds waiting to receive them. Beside him, the unease thickened. A man shifted, grumbled under his breath, then flagged down the attendant again. His voice carried down the row as he demanded to be moved. He claimed Ethan smelled strange, claimed it was unbearable to sit beside him. The attendant apologized, helpless, saying there were no seats left on this fully booked flight. The man sighed heavily, crossing his arms, making sure his disapproval was noticed by everyone around. Through it all, Ethan said nothing. He did not defend himself, did not answer the glares, did not beg for kindness. His silence was not surrender, it was resilience. He kept his gaze on the clouds, searching them like old friends. For in those clouds, no one whispered, no one judged, no one cared about clothes or badges. They simply were, vast and eternal. And for a moment, his spirit seemed to rest in that endlessness. Around him, the atmosphere thickened with disdain. Strangers saw only his jacket, his messy hair, the badge on his chest. They did not see his story, the life that had brought him here, the strength quietly sitting in his hands. But soon, every eye in that cabin would look upon him not with suspicion, not with mockery, but with awe. For Ethan Carter was not what he seemed. Beneath the fatigue and the silence, he carried a skill, a history, and a courage that would soon hold all their lives in balance. This was the day a cabin full of strangers mocked a young gay man for how he looked, yet by the end of the flight, they would rise trembling in respect for the truth they had failed to see. If you want more stories that reveal the power of hidden courage, where dignity outshines prejudice, follow Heart Stories, because what happens next will take your breath away. Marcus spotted him first. The voice cut across the quiet hum of the cabin with a sharp, surprised tone, and heads turned before Ethan even lifted his eyes. At first, he did not recognize the man leaning forward across the aisle, but the voice insisted on familiarity, and slowly a memory stirred. It was Marcus, dressed in a tailored suit the color of midnight, gold cufflinks glinting beneath the cabin lights, his wrist heavy with a watch that caught every reflection of the overhead lamps. He was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that belonged more to performance than to warmth. Ethan offered only a small nod. His expression carried no eagerness, no relief at recognition. It was a faint acknowledgement. No more, Bemon. Yet Marcus did not stop there. His voice grew louder, eager to be overheard. He reminded the surrounding passengers of who Ethan had once been: the brilliant student, the name at the top of every list, the one expected to rise higher than anyone else. Marcus spoke of exams, trophies, scholarships. Each word was less memory and more performance. An announcement to the cabin that he had stumbled across an old friend who had once been extraordinary. But every reminder was wrapped in sharpness. Marcus's tone dripped with self-satisfaction, as though the encounter had been staged for his benefit alone. He compared their lives without hesitation: the CEO's chair, the luxury apartment, the limitless travel budget. His voice carried numbers, achievements, symbols of wealth. The contrast hung in the air like a curtain drawn between them. Ethan listened in silence, his eyes lowered to the worn bag at his feet, fingers brushing the fabric as if steadying himself. From the bag, he drew an object wrapped in cloth, an old pair of glasses in a chipped frame. His hand trembled slightly as he set them on his lap. Yet his gaze, when he lifted his head, was steady, sharp, unflinching. The glasses were ordinary to any stranger, but Ethan handled them as though they were a relic, a fragile vessel for memory. He adjusted the curve of the arms with care, wiped the glass with the sleeve of his jacket, and held them for a moment in his palms before resting them there. Marcus watched, puzzled for a moment, before letting out a small laugh under his breath. He asked no questions. The passengers nearby only smirked, assuming the gesture was some eccentricity of a man clinging to scraps. To them, the glasses were nothing. To Ethan, they were everything. But he gave no explanation. He pressed them carefully back into their case and returned to his silence. The contrast between the two men deepened in those quiet minutes. Marcus leaned back, shoulders broad, the polish of his suit declaring success to anyone who glanced his way. Ethan sat still, denim jacket faded, hair still unsettled from the long night. But his presence carried a gravity that no amount of wealth could mimic. The cabin lights washed his features in pale glow, revealing the tired lines of his face. Yet within that weariness there was something unbroken, something unbending. Around them the plane continued to fill with chatter and movement. Overhead compartments slammed shut, announcements echoed through the speakers, but the small drama unfolding between the two men seemed to exist in its own quiet sphere. Marcus had framed the story himself: the victor, Ethan, the fallen, yet the truth remained hidden, waiting beneath the surface of a young man who chose silence over spectacle, memory over noise. The clouds outside thickened into rolling layers of white and gray. Ethan's gaze returned to them, steady as stone. His fingers still rested lightly on the glasses case, as though drawing strength from its weight. No one else knew what it meant. No one else cared to ask, but that small act, unnoticed by most, revealed more than words could have. It was not defeat. It was preparation. The silence of Ethan Carter was not emptiness. It was the gathering of something far greater, a storm of its own waiting to break. The aircraft lifted from the runway with a shudder that was almost imperceptible at first, a gentle rise smoothed by the engines. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane climbed into a corridor of clouds. Passengers relaxed into their seats, magazines unfolded, screens lit up. The hum of flight filled the background. Yet beneath the surface of that ordinary rhythm, unease lingered, as if the sky was keeping secrets. The first hint came as a tremor, a ripple through the body of the plane. The trays rattled, a child gasped, and several passengers exchanged uneasy glances. The captain's voice announced light turbulence, his tone measured and calm. Belts were fastened, conversations lowered, yet the unease did not fade. Outside the windows, the bright blue began to fade into heavy layers of gray, the clouds no longer playful but swelling with weight. The tremor grew into jolts. The aircraft dipped sharply once, sending a ripple of fear through the cabin. Gasps rose, prayers whispered, the thin veil of composure tearing away. Bags shifted in overhead bins, lights flickered, and the smell of sharp metal filled the air as the cabin seemed to groan against the storm. The flight attendants moved quickly, voices steady, instructing passengers to remain calm, but their eyes betrayed urgency. Then came the moment that silenced everything. A flight attendant emerged from the cockpit, her face pale, lips trembling. Her uniform, usually a symbol of order, now seemed to hang on her as if drained of strength. She spoke words no passenger ever wished to hear. The pilot had collapsed, struck by a sudden stroke, unable to continue. The co-pilot was struggling alone against the storm. The silence was crushing. In that suspended moment, the reality of mortality pressed against every chest. Passengers stared forward, frozen, gripping armrests as if that simple act could keep the plane aloft. Children clung to parents. Whispers turned into sins, and the metallic hum of the aircraft was drowned by the sound of fear itself. The announcement repeated, "Was there anyone aboard who could fly?" The attendant's voice broke on the question. Her training could not disguise the plea hidden beneath it. Faces turned, scanning the rows, searching for a savior among strangers. No one moved. The air grew thick, suffocating in its stillness. Pride, wealth, status, all the things so carefully displayed before suddenly shrank into meaninglessness when confronted with the possibility of the end. The storm outside roared. Lightning flashed, brief silver tearing across the windows, illuminating faces carved by dread. The aircraft shuddered again, a violent tremor that threw cups and loose objects to the floor. Screams erupted, quickly stifled into choked silence. The co-pilot's voice broke through the intercom, urgent, strained, admitting the impossible task of holding control alone. Ethan sat unmoving. His body was still, but his eyes had changed. No longer distant, no longer dulled by fatigue. They burned with an intensity no one had yet seen. He rested one hand on the glass's case, the other gripping the armrest with quiet strength. Around him, chaos spiraled, but he remained a center of calm. No one else noticed him then. Not yet, but the storm would demand more. The silence could not last forever. Someone would have to rise, or they would all fall, and Ethan Carter was already preparing. The chaos inside the cabin grew with every shudder of the aircraft. Passengers clutched one another, some whispering prayers, others frozen in silence. The attendant repeated her call, her voice shaking as she asked again if anyone could take control of the plane. The words fell into the stillness like stones into deep water, unanswered, until finally a hand rose. It was Ethan. Gasps broke through the air. Disbelief swept the rows like a current. Marcus leaned forward, his polished suit tight against his frame, his voice sharp with contempt. He declared loudly that Ethan would kill them all, that trusting him was madness. The scorn rippled through the passengers, their fear searching for an outlet. To them, Ethan was the least likely savior, too young, too unkempt, too marked by difference. The rainbow pin on his chest that had drawn whispers before now seemed almost a mark of ridicule in their panic. But Ethan's gaze did not falter. His eyes, once distant, were alive with a clarity that cut through the chaos. He spoke with calm certainty, telling them he had flown before. Not recently, but enough to try. His voice carried no theatrics, no desperate plea for trust, only the steady tone of a man who knew what he was capable of. That quiet conviction silenced even the most hostile voices, if only for a breath. The co-pilot's voice burst through the intercom, strained and urgent, asking if anyone with experience could come forward. When told of Ethan, he shouted for him to be sent at once. The attendants hesitated, but the weight of the storm left no time for doubt. They gestured for him to follow. Ethan rose from his seat with a steadiness that contrasted the trembling around him. His denim jacket shifted as he straightened, his shoulders set in quiet strength. Each step down the narrow aisle carried a new gravity, the whispers trailing behind him like shadows. The woman who had once pressed a scarf to her nose now lowered her eyes. Marcus leaned back, pale, his earlier arrogance shrinking into unease. Inside the cockpit, the storm revealed its true fury. Lights blinked urgently across the panels. Alarms pierced the air, and the co-pilot's hands shook as he clung to the controls. Ethan entered, pausing only for a heartbeat to take in the scene. His fingers moved with a memory buried but not forgotten, brushing over the instruments as recognition returned like the spark of a long-suppressed flame. He slid into the seat, the glasses case still in his pocket. With deliberate motion, he put on the headset, his voice steady as he spoke to the control tower. He introduced himself not as a passenger, but as Captain Ethan Carter. The name carried weight. The co-pilot froze, his eyes widening with recognition. This was not an ordinary man. This was the young pilot who, years earlier, had defied a storm and saved an entire flight. A legend grounded not by failure, but by prejudice when he had revealed his truth. The revelation spread quickly through the cabin as the attendants whispered it from row to row. Passengers who had sneered and mocked now sat silent, faces flushed with shame. The storm outside raged, but inside the plane a deeper storm had broken the collapse of judgment, the recognition of worth they had refused to see. Ethan did not seek their approval. His focus was on the controls, his hands steady, his mind sharpened by necessity. The plane lurched violently again, but in the cockpit there was no panic. There was only the sound of Ethan's voice, clear and measured, guiding the machine through the chaos. Every command, every movement, carried the weight of someone who had not forgotten, someone who had been waiting for the moment to prove that his wings had never truly been taken away. For the first time since the flight began, hope flickered through the cabin. The man they had dismissed was now the one holding them between sky and earth, and with every passing moment, Ethan Carter was reclaiming not only the plane but the truth of who he was. The storm finally began to thin as the aircraft neared the runway. Ethan's hands moved across the controls with precision, every action deliberate, every command to the co-pilot clear and calm. Outside, the clouds broke into streaks of silver, revealing the faint outline of land below. Inside the cabin, silence reigned, not the silence of fear anymore, but the silence of hope, fragile and desperate. The wheels touched down with a grace that felt unreal. Not a single jolt, not a shudder strong enough to disturb a glass of water. The plane rolled smoothly along the runway until it came to a full stop. Only then did the tension release in a wave of relief. Passengers gasped, some sobbing into their hands, others clasping the arms of those beside them. What they had thought impossible had been done. The cockpit door opened, and Ethan stepped out. His jacket still hung loosely, his hair still messy, the rainbow pin still faded, but his presence was transformed. The same people who had whispered scorn now lowered their heads in shame. The woman who had once pressed a scarf to her nose pressed it now against her eyes, wiping tears. Marcus, pale and shaken, could not speak. The airline director entered the cabin, his uniform immaculate, his face carrying both shock and admiration. He announced that Ethan's landing had been tracked, that the board wanted him reinstated immediately. The words hung heavy, but Ethan shook his head gently. His voice was calm, almost tender, when he said they could strip away uniforms, ranks, and reputations, but they could never strip away his courage, nor his pride in who he was. The twist came quietly, in the form of a boy seated near the back. He stood on trembling legs, tears streaking his cheeks. His voice cracked as he whispered that he, too, carried a rainbow badge in secret, hidden from the world, afraid of what it might cost. "You just showed me," he said, "that maybe I don't have to hide anymore." The cabin fell silent again, but this time it was not fear. It was reverence. Every passenger rose together, one by one, saluting not only the man who saved their lives, but the truth he represented. Ethan Carter had boarded that flight as the object of ridicule. He walked away from it as a hero, not because of the storm he defeated outside, but because of the storm he silenced within the hearts of those who had judged him. And so I ask you, if you had been on that plane, would you have stood to mock, or would you have stood to salute for more stories of dignity, justice, and hidden courage revealed? Make sure you follow and subscribe to Heart Stories. The next story may just change the way you see the world.